Thank you very much, Karin, for this friendly presentation of myself and also for giving a summary of what you did yesterday. I think it's a very wise decision to start this day number 2 now with another aspect of mental health, which is the mental health of those who care for others, the mental health of healthcare professionals going through different sorts of stresses. And I'd like to also welcome you this morning, even though I can't see your faces, but I just imagine you being in different places all over the planet, listening to our sharings, our ideas, and also, of course, holding yourself certain experiences of stress, of being overburdened. So this is especially for you. This is especially for those of you who are those compassionate witnesses to the impact of violence. Let me just explain a little bit from which angle I want to look today at this topic. As Karin rightly said, I'm a psychologist, I'm a psychotherapist and a trauma specialist also. I work a lot in the area of sexualized and gender-based violence. As a consultant, as a trainer, I have been to many African countries, and I lived, in fact, in Eastern Africa for several years. And there is one part which I consider very, very important. If we cannot take care of ourselves and if our organizations do not consider self-care and staff care as professional obligation, we will lose our main force. And that is our compassion, it's our knowledge, of course, but it's also our ability to resonate with survivors. And this is why I'm today with you now from the angle, not of that person giving training to others about what they can do to stabilize survivors of violence, but it's about you and what you can do to become self-caring health professional. And in order to become that, it's also a lot about becoming aware of the stresses. So I'd like to just perhaps, because it's my first step into this presentation, I'd like to just bring to your attention yourselves this morning. Can you just feel a little bit into your body? Can you see whether you're sitting comfortably, whether you feel any pain or any stress, perhaps from listening to all the stories yesterday or from the work you're doing? And can you just hold for some seconds this body awareness and allow yourself to breathe in and breathe out deeply? Yeah. And with this friendly laughing face towards yourself, to welcome you into that day, and to also welcome your compassion, to welcome your courage to deal with all these difficulties. So let's breathe in together and breathe out together and try to deepen with every breath a little bit more your breathing and your awareness. So let's start and breathe in your own rhythm. And the last time, deeply in and out. Okay. Good. So please take good care of yourselves also while I'm presenting, because of course this always brings back also some of the pain, some of the problems that you have been experiencing. I'd like to invite for the next slide. Could you bring up the next slide? Thank you. This is the dilemma in which I see many of you people, medical health professionals, when thinking about self-care. This is a quote from a personal interview that I did in Eastern Congo some years ago. A medical doctor saying, "When I try to relax on my free day and play with my daughters, I keep thinking of the girls in the hospital, 8, 9, 10 years old, who have been gang raped. I keep thinking of their pain and fear in their eyes when I examine them, and at the cruelty that I see on their little bodies. Their genitals are completely destroyed. Even if you repair their body, you cannot repair their lives. This thought keeps haunting me." And I contrast it with a quote which I cherish a lot from Yael Danieli, Israeli psychotherapist working with survivors of the Holocaust. She says, "Being kind to oneself and feeling free to have fun and joy is not a frivolity in this field, but a necessity, without which one cannot fulfill one's professional obligations, one's professional contract." I say it again, being kind to oneself and feeling free to have fun and joy is not a frivolity in this field, but a necessity, without which one cannot fulfill one's professional obligations, one's professional contract. Okay, let's go to the next slide and look and also acknowledge the stress, the types of stress that healthcare professionals go through in their work. The first one is what we can call day-to-day stress, stress that is related to the work of healthcare. It's a heavy workload, I think, all over the world, especially now under the COVID-19 crisis, but not only then, of course. A limited time to care for patients and very often existential death and life decisions. I'm just thinking about all these interviews that I read about medical health professionals in India these days, or last year in Italy, and other places all over the world. What it means to take decisions that have an impact on death and life. Also precarious job situations, and that means being understaffed, chronically understaffed, or being not being paid, unpaid, or not adequately paid, with a lot of workload. This has been a major stressor, for example, now in Liberia, where I did supervision for healthcare professionals, online supervision during the COVID-19 crisis. That there were many who left the hospital, and those who remained did not get adequate payment for what they worked. Now, this is sort of a continuous stress, you can call it. Then I'm also referring to traumatic stress, for example, when being exposed to violence and threat. In countries where there's conflict, where there's war, but also in countries where when women, after being hurt by their intimate partners, go to hospitals and are treated, where sometimes medical personnel gets threats that if they give it to the police or if they hand over the case to the court, this will have consequences for them. So they are under threat of violence. Also, the professional risks of getting infected. Since we are dealing with COVID-19, this is a huge stress, and especially in countries where there is no protection for health personnel. It's COVID-19, and I'm thinking about other infections like the Ebola crisis, where I also did a lot of supervision work for health teams online. So this is, of course, a stress that we can call traumatic. Then something that you found in the quotation, the secondary traumatic stress, when being exposed to the physical wounds of violence during healthcare work. Now, yesterday you have listened to the stories, and perhaps you have felt in your own body how this made you feel stressed and low in your energy. Now, when you are in front of these wounds, so when your eyes absorb also the sight of this violence, this has a very deep impact on your ability to cope with that situation. Because it makes you feel stressed, it makes you feel resonating with this pain. And I'm coming to that in one of the next slides. But just to say, this is also there. When you do healthcare work, of course, you see the violence. And so you are a witness to violence. And then something that I found very often in health teams, it's stress related to overwhelming expectations of having to be emotionally in control. That's how I call it. So it's not only that it's stressful in itself, but the context and the institutions, they rather deny emotional responses and make people feel that showing stress and emotional overload is considered to be a sign of weakness and lack of professionalism. So I had so many moments when healthcare workers told me, well, it's unprofessional to cry with the people. So we withdraw our feelings. So it's a constant suppression of one's own emotional response. I always feel as a therapist, we have a great acceptance, even in countries of the global south, it's very much accepted that that mental health care professionals deal with self-care. But for the physical part of healthcare work, it seems like doctors, nurses, etc., they are not expected to be stressed or to not be able to deal with that stress. So that causes another stress. And the last part is moral stress, feeling that others suffer so much more and may lose their life. And this is the life-death problem that you deal with. So self-care or experiencing joy may feel immoral. Like in the quote that I just heard, it's like a frivolity. Yeah? Why should I care for myself? Why should I play with my daughters if there are girls who are almost dying of the violence they've gone through? So it feels very difficult to do it. Okay, let's go on. So you see a candle here, burnout. And the candle is a very strong symbol of hope. And this is what very many healthcare professionals who suffer from burnout experience in the beginning. They burn for something. Yeah? They want to change something. Overachievement and overmotivation is often combined with an experience of gradual burning out. So there is one definition, there are many definitions, and you might have heard them. I just want to mention it. One definition that I find very clear and very consistent, and that is the definition of Maslach and Jackson from 1986. They describe it as a syndrome of emotional exhaustion, so being dead tired, and where it doesn't stop even by sleeping long hours. The second typical problem is depersonalization, which is not feeling connected anymore, feeling very far away from patients, feeling as if they were not in touch with oneself, and also feeling cynical about the work. And reduced personal accomplishment. I work, and the more I work, the less I'm able to fulfill my tasks. That goes in stages, of course, but what we can say is, especially people who are in a sort of people work of some kind are in danger of burnout. So it's all people caring for others, and of course also healthcare workers. In all studies that I saw, at least a third of healthcare workers has been through stages of burnout or are suffering from burnout. So it's an area, professional area, that is in high risk. And of course, as you can see, these are all problems that counteract your ability to do a good job, in fact. Similar concept is perhaps what you know about compassion fatigue. So the inability to feel compassion anymore with people, just feeling dead inside. This is what I heard from many, that they feel there is no connection anymore, not to the patients, and very often also not to their families, their friends. So they feel tired of feeling with others. So let's continue. Secondary trauma. This is something that I observed a lot in my coachees, and what I also observed when I do supervision in people. You can see these two heads being close to each other. Of course, this is not the typical position of healthcare workers, but of course there is a transfer of experiences that is happening when we are caring for others. And especially if we open our hearts, so to say, to the pain and the problems of others. I'll give you a very speaking quote first. Secondary trauma is the experience of bearing witness to the atrocities committed against another. It is the result of absorbing the sight, smell, sound, touch, and feel of the stories. It is the energy that comes from being in the presence of trauma, and it is how our bodies and psyche react to the profound despair, rage, and pain. Bearing witness to the atrocities committed against another. When I do these type of presentations with therapists or counselors, of course they can resonate very clearly with this idea. But I want to bring it to the attention now of healthcare professionals, of people dealing in healthcare, because it is an underrated experience, that when you see in the wounds of people, when you see in their faces, when you see in their reactions, when you touch them in order to examine or in order to bend the wounds, that you absorb this story. You don't even have to know it in detail, but you see it from the type of problems, physical problems that person shows. You see what she went through. And when you deal with that, of course, you absorb this pain. Yeah? And if you have a lot of these situations, of course, you may, thank you for that comment. You may, well, the more you are dealing with it under a lot of time pressure, the more you feel this heaviness of absorbing. By caring for the physical wounds of violence, healthcare providers may experience similar problems as those of their traumatized patients. This is what secondary trauma is all about. For example, intrusive images of the violence. Yeah, so let's say a medical doctor or a nurse dealing with survivors of gender-based violence, going home and doing something like just washing the dishes or watching the news and playing with the children, like in the other quote, and all of a sudden it's like in their thoughts, these wounds keep coming back. I mean, the images keep coming back. Or you may do something which is similar to the situation that your patient went through before the violence or so. And all of a sudden it just comes back what the story was all about that you dealt with today. And it happens just spontaneously. It's something as if our brains are trying to work through these images, because it's not normal to see, let's say, 8-9 years old having been gang raped and what is left on their body. And it's not normal to see women and other vulnerable persons to be hit, to be beaten up, to be tortured. So of course, how can we expect our brains to just accept what we see when we deal with these wounds? So this is very strong, these intrusive images. Also the hyper alertness, I found it a lot that people cannot calm down again. And also fear, typically fear. I had a lot of fear reactions, especially now in Congo, and especially of the women treating survivors of sexualized violence. This means nurses, but also female medical doctors who always also felt like, this is a woman like me, it could have been also me. And that creates a heightened fear, which is typical for trauma. Loss of joy and interest in joyful activities. This is what many told me, especially when they think about their own families or going out with friends, having fun, that they feel like they are losing this wish to just have a normal life. It's like always being touched by the pain of those who they care for. It's especially strong when survivors have a high vulnerability, which is with children, but I'm also thinking about other, like I'm thinking about survivors with handicaps who have been raped or have been raped several times. I'm thinking about poor women who have no chance then going back to the violent places where they have just been almost killed, because they fear they could lose their children, or their husbands, their partners could do something to their children. So they go back to a place where they are continuously destroyed. And when you deal with them, you have no chance then being touched by that vulnerability. So of course you may go home. That's what I was told. Sometimes I go home and I think of her and I think, is she going to survive the night again? Of course my sleep will be affected by that. And it's very difficult to tell somebody, well, can you relax? Can you do some breathing exercises? So all that. Okay, so my last slide, I think, before we go into the discussion. Yeah, and I'm very happy because I see already reactions. Of course, I could tell you now, go to sleep regularly, eat regularly, eat healthy food, play and do sports, etc. And you know all that. The thing is, what is wrong when we know that we should take care of ourselves and we still don't do it? And this is what I want to give you as a last slide and then discuss. We have a beautiful idea being presented from Sakwitn and Perlman in 1996. They talk about the ABC of self-care. And I want to present it, awareness, of course. What we are doing right here is we are doing awareness raising. Then, of course, balance. Most of our health self-care activities are about balancing stress and relaxation. Yeah. Only relaxation would also not work. So we have to also do something that is also stressful in a sense. And we need, in all our self-care, we need connection with ourselves, with others, and also especially colleagues. That's what I felt most powerful when colleagues talk with each other about their level of stress, like in supervision, and also with a higher power or sense. That may be God or Allah or another higher power, but it can also be a sense, a meaning that I believe in humanity, that I have high values. This is also connection, that I feel connected with my values. The D is my personal sort of add, because I think even with ABC we are not done. We need a decision to see self-care and staff care as professional obligation, not as an added value, not as something as an annex, that it's part of your profession, full stop. And the decision has to be taken on all three levels. The personal one, of course, what you do outside your work matters. Yeah? You have to decide that you do sports even if you feel overwhelmed by what was happening during the day. It doesn't have to be sports, by the way. It can also be something else, but something healthy. You have to decide on that you need to do it even though you don't feel like you want, in order to, well, be professional. Self-care and healthcare, self-care and staff care is also in the professional field, and I work a lot on that. How do you organize your professional work? How do you use an 8-hour day so that you don't enter the day healthy and strong and you go out of it and you're totally destroyed? So how can you during the day make sure that in your professional work you integrate this sort of self-care? And I'm not talking now about having 2 hours of lunch break, but how can you do the lunch break in a way that you can work on your stress and on the stress of your colleagues? And the last point is a very passionate one. Can I just come back? Sorry, I'm a little bit, I'm not very fast because I'm so passionate about it. And that is the organizational part. Yeah. I've heard also from organizations, yeah, can you do something for self-care for our staff? And I usually like that because that is a very big step ahead. But if an organization is not changing its structures, its procedures, if it's just a place where people burn out, it doesn't matter how long you do yoga exercises, or how you try to do everything to take care of yourself. You're going to be tired of this sort. So an organization has to commit itself to structures and procedures for staff members to deal with the impact of stress and trauma. For example, regular supervision. And I'm talking about the medical personnel, training, providing adequate time off, like going on vacations. Also team building, because I see a lot of conflicts happening in teams because of the stress. And yet the colleagues in a medical health team, they need each other to go on with their work. So an organization has to commit itself to self-care and staff care. Otherwise, it would be like well, trying to make people fit to just go back into destruction when the structures are not favorable. So thank you very much for that. And I'd like to welcome now your questions.